Some things just don't sit right, no matter how much you try to rationalize them. It was almost midnight when the power went out. I was working late in the garage on a custom cabinet job when the overhead light flickered twice, buzzed, and died. Not just the garage, half the house. The other half hummed like nothing had happened. We'd had a few flickers the past week, but this time it was different. A third of the house just dropped dead. I grabbed my flashlight off the workbench and headed toward the basement. It wasn't the first time I'd had to fix something at that hour. Owning a renovation company means your own house is usually your last priority. I'd rewired dozens of homes across Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, but our own electrical was a work in progress. Laura had been out of town for the week. She left Monday morning for a conference in Harrisburg and was supposed to get back tonight, late. I figured I'd have time to reset the breaker and maybe finally trace the issue to whatever aging junction box the previous owner had buried behind drywall. The stairs creaked like they always did. The smell of cold stone and dust hit me as soon as I stepped onto the basement floor. I aimed the flashlight at the panel, its metal face cold to the touch. I opened it, scanned the rows. Everything looked normal, but I knew better than to trust appearances when it came to wiring. One circuit, marked Living RM and Hall, was switched off. That's the one I flipped a few days ago after it tripped during Laura's last work trip. I was halfway through checking the connections when it happened. Every light upstairs came on. Hallways, kitchen, even the garage, bright like a show had just started. I froze, hands still on the box. The breaker was still off. That circuit was disconnected. It shouldn't be possible. My first instinct? A short, maybe a bad neutral line causing feedback into another leg of the system. My second instinct? Something else. I stood there for a full minute listening. Nothing moved. No footsteps. No noise upstairs. Just the soft hum of power now returned. I flicked the flashlight off, not needing it anymore, but I didn't feel any relief. If anything, a slow tension began to tighten in my chest. I shut the panel and climbed the stairs, ears straining. Still nothing. Just the ordinary creaks of old wood and the tick of the hallway clock. Then I saw it. A handbag. Not Laura's usual navy leather one. The one she took everywhere and I knew like the back of my hand. This one was beige. Sleek. Compact. Designer, probably. It sat on the edge of the couch, positioned like it had been tossed there in a hurry. I'd left this morning at 6:30 and it hadn't been there then. I would have noticed. I always noticed. I took a step closer. Next to the bag on the coffee table sat a wine glass. Half full. Lipstick on the rim. The lipstick was a darker shade than Laura usually wore. More Berg *NDY than pink. The scent of red wine hung faintly in the air, just enough to tell me it had been poured recently. Not the day before. Not this morning. Tonight. I stood there, not touching anything. Not saying anything. Just taking in the scene like a man trying to solve a riddle with his gut. The couch throw was wrinkled. Our Bluetooth speaker, the one we only used during dinner or late-night music, sat powered on, idle. Laura never left it on. Ever. She was meticulous about that kind of thing. Waste not, she'd always say. And then I noticed the faintest trace of perfume. Not citrus and clean like Laura's usual scent, but something heavier. Muskier. Spicier. It clung to the air, bold enough to catch your attention without announcing itself. I moved quietly toward the hallway, checking the front door. Locked. Chain in place. Deadbolt secure. The same way I'd left it this morning. Which meant whoever had been here hadn't come through the front. And unless a stranger had a key that narrowed it down to, well, one person. I heard the rattle of wheels on pavement just outside. The unmistakable sound of her suitcase rolling across the front walkway. Then the door opened. Laura stepped inside with the kind of casual ease that comes from either total confidence or practiced performance. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and her navy suit looked like it had been stuffed into the carry-on she now rolled behind her. She didn't notice me at first. "Hey!" she said when she looked up, clearly surprised to see me standing in the middle of the living room. "You're still up. Power went out," I replied, voice low. "I was checking the wiring in the basement." She nodded too quickly. "Ah, again? Weird." Yeah, I said. Weird. She didn't ask for details. Didn't ask what caused the outage or whether I'd fixed it. Instead, her eyes flicked, just briefly, to the coffee table. Then back to me. You look tired, she said. Long day at the site? A little, I said, watching her carefully. She bent down to unlace her shoes, avoiding eye contact. That's when I noticed her blouse was half untucked, and her makeup, though lightly touched up, showed signs of a hasty fix. The line of her lipstick wasn't even. There were faint crease marks on her cheek, like she'd leaned against a pillow not long ago. Everything go okay at the conference? I asked, trying not to sound pointed. Fine, she said quickly. You know how these things are. Panels, small talk, too much coffee. She moved toward the stairs but paused when she realized I wasn't following. You coming up? She asked. I looked at the wine glass again. You have company earlier? She froze just slightly, just enough that if you weren't looking for it, you'd miss it. But I wasn't just looking. I was cataloging every movement. She turned around slowly. What? The wine glass, I said, gesturing. And the bag. She blinked. Oh, that's mine. The bag, it's new. I picked it up during the conference. And the wine. She hesitated. I poured it before I left. Forgot to clean up. Before she left? That was 2 nights ago. The wine hadn't oxidized. It smelled fresh. Laura may not be a sommelier, but she knew a 3-day-old pour when she saw one. I didn't call her out on it. Yet, I just nodded. Right? She shifted on her feet. Did you check the breaker labeled living room? Yeah, I said. Funny thing. Lights came back on before I reset it. She blinked again. Maybe you flipped the wrong one. You know that panel's confusing. And just like that, she redirected. Away from wine glasses and handbags. Away from awkward questions. I watched her start up the stairs, and for the first time in years, I didn't follow. I stood alone in the quiet hum of a house that no longer felt like home. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting each faint tick of the wall clock. Every sound in the house, the settling of the beams, the distant hum of the fridge, felt suspicious, unfamiliar, wrong. Laura had climbed into bed without another word after her odd little performance in the living room. She curled up with her back to me, like always. No goodnight kiss. No missed you. Nothing. That silence was its own kind of truth. My thoughts wouldn't stop spinning. I kept replaying everything. How the lights mysteriously came on while the breaker was still off. The handbag on the couch. The fresh wine glass. The barely covered fatigue on her face. And her lipstick, which I now realized matched the smudge on the rim. She'd lied. Badly. I kept asking myself, why? In the morning, I said nothing. Neither did she. We moved around the kitchen like strangers in a shared Airbnb. I watched her carefully. How she tucked her hair behind her ear. How she checked her phone more often than usual. How she faked a yawn when I asked if she slept okay. I'm just still tired from the trip, she said, not meeting my eyes. I nodded like I believed her, but something inside me had shifted. The version of Laura I saw now wasn't the one I'd married. Later that day, while she was in the shower, I opened the laundry basket. Her conference clothes were crumpled inside. A navy suit with deep wrinkles that couldn't have come just from sitting in a car. She hadn't changed into it that morning. The blouse had a faint stain near the collar. And her perfume? It wasn't her usual kind. It was heavier, unfamiliar, and unmistakably not what she left with. I remembered she had left with her navy handbag. Not the beige one I found on the couch. That detail stuck in my mind like a splinter. I started to think back over the last few months. Things I'd ignored, moments I'd written off as stress or coincidence. But they weren't coincidences. Not anymore. The first time I felt something was off was back in June. Laura had been heading to a conference then, too, in Philadelphia. At the time, I didn't think twice. But now, I remember how she came home exhausted, distant, and oddly defensive when I asked how it went. I also remembered something else, the neighbor, Mrs. Finnegan, who loved small talk. She mentioned seeing a black sedan parked in front of our house on a Thursday afternoon while I was out on site. Funny, she'd said. I thought Laura was out of town, but the car was parked out front for hours. Didn't recognize the driver. At the time, I'd laughed it off. But now I remembered that conversation differently. Then there were the phone calls Laura always took outside. The nights she fell asleep early but still managed to drain a full glass of wine left on the nightstand. And the office keys. I'd lost my keys to the company office about a month ago, only to find them days later in Laura's purse. She'd looked surprised when I pulled them out. Said she must have picked them up by mistake. But she doesn't go to the office. Ever. Then there were the bruises. At least that's what I told myself they were. I'd seen them 3 times. Small, red marks near her collarbone or on her inner arm. I asked her once, gently. She laughed it off and said it was probably an allergic reaction. Maybe from a necklace, she offered. But Laura wasn't allergic to anything. I would know. We'd filled out health insurance paperwork together. And the location of the marks, it didn't line up with jewelry. Now, in hindsight, it all started forming a clearer picture. Not one I wanted to see, but one I couldn't ignore anymore. Her trips had become more frequent. Her mood shifted before and after each one. Giddy before, drained after. When she left, she always packed light. 1 bag. But when she returned, there were new things. Clothes I didn't recognize, receipts from restaurants we'd never been to together, and once, a travel-sized cologne buried in her toiletry case. Sample from the hotel, she'd said casually when I raised an eyebrow. They left it in the bathroom. Thought I'd bring it home. Back then I shrugged it off. But I remember the smell now. It was the same one I'd faintly picked up that night in the living room, clinging to the air near the wine glass. A stranger's scent. A man's scent. And then, there were the documents. Company documents. One night, I'd forgotten my laptop charger and swung by the office late. Laura had insisted she'd already locked up earlier that evening. She'd stopped by to grab something, she claimed, but the alarm logs showed a second entry, hours after her supposed visit. And I found one of our proposal folders, usually secured in the safe, sitting on my desk. At the time, I chalked it up to Adam, my business partner. But now, the memory felt darker. Adam. The thought hit me hard. I didn't want to believe it. Adam and I had built our renovation firm from the ground up. We split everything. Profits. Projects. He'd been the best man at our wedding. But there were moments, small ones, that didn't sit right anymore. Conversations between Laura and Adam that felt too familiar. The way he'd always asked about her, even when it didn't make sense. That one time I showed up late to a site and found him whispering with her outside the truck. They'd both laughed nervously when I walked up. Just talking about paint colors, Laura had said. At the time, I believed her. But belief is a fragile thing. It only takes a crack to shatter. I tried to talk myself out of it. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was inventing stories out of stress. After all, running a business during a construction boom in Pittsburgh wasn't exactly relaxing. But the more I pulled at the threads, the more they unraveled. The story I had told myself about my life wasn't holding together. After dinner that night, one of those awkward, quiet meals where we barely made eye contact, I excused myself early, said I was tired. Truthfully, I just needed space to think. I lay in bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling again. But this time I wasn't stuck in confusion. I was collecting, counting, measuring every inconsistency, every unexplained moment, every lie hidden under a laugh. It all made sense now. The missed calls, the vague explanations, the work friends I'd never met. Even the way she sometimes wore her clothes slightly differently when she came home from trips. Like someone had helped her get dressed again in a hurry. And I realized something else that kept me awake for hours. I'd been ignoring my gut. Because the truth wasn't just inconvenient. It was life-changing. And I wasn't ready to admit that the woman I'd shared a bed with for years might have been slowly walking out the door behind my back. But I was ready now. Tomorrow I'd go to the office. Alone. And I'd check the security cameras. If I was wrong, I'd apologize to her for the rest of my life. But if I was right, then this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about a breach of trust that went deeper than I wanted to imagine. The next morning, I got to the office an hour before anyone else. I didn't even stop for coffee, just went straight to the back hallway, where the security cabinet was mounted on the wall. The whole drive over, my heart had been thudding with a mix of dread and anger. It was hard to tell which emotion was leading the charge anymore. I unlocked the panel and booted up the system. Our cameras weren't fancy, just a simple setup to keep track of who came and went. Front door, back hallway, office floor, and one aimed directly at the safe in the back conference room. I hadn't checked the logs in months. There'd never been a reason to, but now I had one. I entered the admin passcode, my passcode, and scrolled through the archives. I filtered for after-hours entries over the past month. My gut told me to check 2 weeks ago, the night Laura told me she was staying overnight for a networking mixer in Erie. And there it was. June 6th, 11:42 p.m. Motion detected. Back hallway. I clicked the file. The feed loaded. My stomach dropped. There she was. Laura. Wearing that same beige coat she had worn just days ago when she came back from Harrisburg. Her hair was pulled back. Her movements hurried. She looked over her shoulder as she entered the code at the side door. A second later, the camera caught the door opening wider, and Adam stepped in behind her. Adam. There was no mistaking him. 6'2", that ever-present black fleece he wore on job sites even in summer, and his arrogant posture, like the whole world owed him something. I watched in stunned silence as they walked toward the conference room. No hesitation, no confusion. Just two people who knew exactly where they were going. The timestamp ticked on. 11:47 p.m. Camera 3, conference room safe. They entered the frame. Laura was holding a folder, one I instantly recognized as part of our Pine Grove bid package. Adam pulled keys from his pocket, my duplicate keys, and opened the safe. I leaned in, barely breathing. He handed her documents. She nodded. They spoke, but the footage had no sound. Still, their body language was obvious. Close. Too close. Then it happened. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I rewound the footage just to be sure. But there it was. Laura leaned in, whispered something. Adam laughed. Then she touched his chest lightly and reached up to kiss him. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was deliberate. Familiar. Like this wasn't the first time. And he didn't pull away. I felt like someone had kicked me square in the chest. I hit pause, the frame frozen on the image of my wife kissing my business partner in our own office. 10 feet from where I'd drafted the initial design plans for the company. 10 feet from the couch I'd napped on after 14-hour shifts. I kept watching, even though every instinct told me not to. They stayed in the room for over 30 minutes. She sat in my chair. He stood close, his hand resting on the arm of the seat. They reviewed documents, took pictures with their phones, and stuffed papers into Laura's bag. Documents that weren't theirs to handle. Proposals, estimates, subcontractor bids. Everything we'd been preparing for the Weston development deal. A 7-figure job that could shape our company for the next 3 years. They were stealing from me. Not just emotionally, professionally. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning something. By the time I closed the footage window, I wasn't shaking anymore. I was quiet, focused. I sat there for another hour, reviewing camera logs, collecting footage, and backing up the files to a private drive I kept for sensitive client data. It was supposed to be for insurance audits, but it was about to serve a different purpose. Around 9:15, our junior designer, Jenna, walked in with her usual coffee in hand. "Morning, Tom," she said cheerfully, not noticing anything wrong. "Hey, Jenna. Quick question, was Adam in the office last night?" She blinked. "Not that I saw. I think he said he was working from home." I nodded. "Thanks." She walked past without suspicion, which meant Adam hadn't told anyone he was stopping by. Typical. Always covering his tracks, just not well enough. At 9:40, Adam walked in. He didn't even look guilty. "Morning," he said, setting his thermos down and loosening his collar. "Client walkthrough today at Ridge Hill, right?" I stared at him for a long moment before answering. "Yeah." This afternoon. He met my gaze for half a second, then looked away. Everything okay? He asked, like it was a casual Tuesday. Peachy, I said. Busy morning. He nodded and walked off toward his office, completely unaware that I just watched him betray me from 3 different angles on grainy black and white footage. I spent the rest of the morning collecting more evidence, cross-checking building access logs, timestamping the footage, and printing copies of the safe inventory. I knew what I was going to do next, and I knew I had to make it public. Not for revenge, for clarity. I didn't want anyone questioning what happened when the fallout started. At 3 p.m. I called an impromptu project update meeting in the main conference room. I emailed Adam, Laura, Jenna, and 2 of our senior subcontractors. Said we'd review the final stages of the Weston bid before submitting. They all showed up by 3:15. Laura came straight from home, still in a dress shirt and heels. She smiled when she walked in, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Adam walked in beside her. Of course. I waited for everyone to settle, then stood at the front of the room with the screen behind me. No PowerPoint, no spreadsheets, just silence. Before we get started, I said, keeping my voice calm, I want to share something with the team. I pressed play. The security footage began to roll. At first, it was just the back hallway, the 2 of them entering. Then the conference room camera. Laura and Adam, moving fast, their faces lit up by phone screens. The room went still. Jenna's jaw dropped. One of the subcontractors muttered, "Holy hell!" Adam stood slowly. "What the hell is this?" Laura's face turned white. She looked at me, lips parted, speechless. "You tell me," I said. He looked around the room, suddenly realizing just how exposed he was. "Tom, this isn't what it looks like." "No," I interrupted. "It looks like you and my wife broke into our office, stole confidential files, and used my own keys to raid our safe." "That's a lie," Laura blurted out, her voice shrill. I didn't even look at her. I turned to the group. "I've backed up all the footage. Security logs confirm the timestamps. I'll be submitting this to our legal counsel this evening." One of the subs leaned back in his chair. "Damn, Adam, you've got some nerve." The moment broke. Adam lost it. He slammed his hand on the table. "You don't know what you're talking about. You think you're some kind of hero, Tom? We built this place together. And you tried to burn it down behind my back," I said quietly. "With my wife." Laura looked like she wanted to disappear. Her eyes were glassy. Her voice stuck in her throat. I looked at her. "How long?" I asked. She didn't answer. "How long, Laura?" Still nothing. That silence told me everything I needed to know. "Meeting's over," I said, turning off the projector. "Adam, pack your things. You're done here." He looked like he was going to argue. Then he saw my face. He didn't. As they left him storming out, her walking behind with her shoulders hunched, I felt something strange wash over me. Not relief, but certainty. This was no longer suspicion. It was fact. And facts gave me power. In the hours after the confrontation, my phone barely stopped vibrating. Text messages, missed calls, emails. 2 from Adam, 1 from Laura. The rest were from people who had either been in that conference room or heard about it within minutes. Gossip in the construction world moves fast, especially in a tight-knit city like Pittsburgh. By dinner time, everyone from our drywall subcontractor to the city permit officer had heard something about Tom Reed catching his partner red-handed. I didn't answer anyone. Not yet. Instead, I drove. I needed to get out of the building, away from that conference room, away from the look in Laura's eyes when the footage started. That wasn't guilt. It was fear of being caught, not of hurting me. It had rained earlier. The streets were slick, reflecting red and amber light from the traffic signals. I took the long way home, looping through Highland Park and then down toward the river. I wasn't really heading anywhere. I just needed motion. Stillness felt dangerous, like my thoughts might catch up and tear me apart. By the time I pulled into our driveway, it was past 8. Laura's car wasn't there. No surprise. I walked inside, and everything felt too clean. The house had that curated quiet, like a stage set waiting for the actors to return. The wine glass was gone from the table, so was the beige handbag, but the memory of them was still loud in the room. On the kitchen counter, she'd left a note. "We need to talk. Please. This isn't what you think. I love you. L." I read it once, then again, then folded it in half and dropped it in the trash without a word. I didn't need more talking. I needed accountability, and I knew exactly how to get it. The next morning, I sent a calendar invite to the board of our company, our financial advisor, our attorney, our investor liaison, and Adam. Subject: urgent structural review. I made it sound boring on purpose, just vague enough that no one would cancel. I also reached out to our corporate communications lead, Mia. She was a sharp former journalist turned PR strategist who had helped us navigate tight deadlines and one licensing crisis a year ago. I told her I needed a confidential consult. She agreed to meet me an hour before the board meeting. "Damage control?" she asked me the moment we sat down in my office. "More like damage exposure," I said. Mia listened quietly as I showed her the footage. She didn't interrupt once. When it ended, she leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. "Well," she said, "this is nuclear. I know. What's your endgame? Truth and consequences. For both of them." She nodded slowly. "You realize once this is public, there's no undoing it. That's the point." By 2 p.m. the board was gathered in the main conference room. 7 people total, including me and Adam. Laura wasn't there, this wasn't her domain. But she'd show up later. She always did when things started slipping out of her hands. Adam looked tired, sweaty around the collar. He hadn't shaved, and for once, his confidence didn't enter the room before he did. I sat at the head of the table. Mia stood off to the side, silent. "Thanks for coming," I began, keeping my voice even. "This won't take long, but it's important." "Is this about the Weston project?" one board member asked. "In a way, yes," I said. "But more than that, it's about internal security and integrity." I clicked the projector remote and queued up the footage again. Same clips, same timestamp overlays. I let the room watch without commentary. Just the soft hum of the AC and the low murmur of moving images. When the clip ended, Laura and Adam leaning over the safe, his hand brushing hers. The room was silent. Adam was already halfway out of his chair. "This is out of context." I turned toward him. "You're on camera entering the building using restricted access. Night. Without authorization. With my wife. You accessed our secure documents, proprietary bids, and internal financials." He opened his mouth to protest, but one of the board members cut him off. "Adam, is that you on the footage?" He hesitated. Then, "Yes, but... and is that Tom's wife with you?" He looked down. "Yes." There was a long silence. Another board member leaned forward. "You do realize what this means?" Mia stepped in. "It's not just an ethical breach. It's corporate espionage. You accessed files unrelated to your purview, shared them with an unauthorized third party, and potentially jeopardized a 7-figure deal." "I didn't share anything," Adam said quickly. "We were just..." "Just what?" I asked. "Just making out next to sensitive contracts?" He didn't answer. The legal advisor, a meticulous woman named Ellen, spoke next. "I'm initiating an immediate inquiry into breach of fiduciary duty. Adam, as of now, you're suspended from all company operations pending investigation." Adam's face turned red. "You're taking his side?" "No," she said coolly. "We're taking the company's side." I expected him to get angry, maybe even throw something, but he didn't. He just stood, adjusted his blazer, and left the room without another word. I let the door close behind him before speaking again. "For the record," I said to the board, "I'm moving to terminate Adam's partnership under Clause 6(2) of our operating agreement, malicious misconduct." "I second," one member said. "I third," said another. Ellen raised her hand. "We'll proceed with a formal vote next week. But given the footage, I'd say the outcome is obvious. I nodded. Thank you. The meeting adjourned at 3:17 p.m. By 4 o'clock, the footage had been discreetly sent to our legal team and our insurance broker, who both requested full statements. Mia drafted a preliminary internal memo, just in case the story leaked before we controlled the narrative. But we didn't have to wait long. At 5:09 p.m., I received a text from a former subcontractor. Heard about Adam. Damn. Laura too? That's cold, man. You okay? At 5:22, my cousin Jeremy, who I hadn't spoken to in 6 months, texted me, just saw a post. You want to talk? And at 6:01, Laura showed up at the office. I was in my private workroom, boxing up documents from a project she'd once helped me coordinate. She walked in like she still belonged there. You humiliated me, she said, voice tight. I didn't look up. I showed people the truth. You could have spoken to me privately. I tried. You lied. You shifted blame. You gaslit me about wiring and wine and handbags. Her lip trembled. Do you have any idea what this has done to my reputation? I finally looked at her. You mean the one you used to sneak into my company and steal with my business partner? That reputation? She flinched. I loved you, Tom. I looked at her for a long time. Maybe you did, but you loved yourself more. She didn't respond. When she finally left the room, she paused in the doorway. You're not who I thought you were. No, I said. I'm someone who knows the truth now. She walked out, and this time I didn't watch her go. In the week that followed, my life became a collision of legal strategy, quiet anger, and controlled chaos. The company was still standing, but it felt like we were operating with half a foundation. Adam had been suspended, but his presence still lingered through half-finished emails, flagged invoices, and subcontractor chains he'd once led. Some of our junior staff didn't know whether to act like he was gone or treat it like an extended vacation. The truth hadn't made it into the newsletter, but everyone knew. And worse, everyone was watching me, waiting to see what I'd do next. Ellen, our legal advisor, kept her voice calm but clear when we met. He's going to fight it, she said. Let him. She adjusted her glasses and folded her hands. He'll try to make this about finances, not betrayal. He'll paint you as unstable, emotional. He'll dig into anything that makes you look vindictive. He doesn't have anything. She gave me a look that meant, that doesn't mean he won't try to find something. 2 days after the board meeting, Adam's lawyer sent an official notice. He was contesting the termination of his partnership share. The claim that I had misused company funds for personal leverage, and that I had manipulated staff with unauthorized surveillance for retaliatory purposes. I read the letter 3 times, each time with more disbelief than the last. He wasn't denying what happened. He was flipping the script, painting me as the villain. According to his narrative, I'd used company security systems to entrap him and Laura, that I'd violated office privacy laws, that the footage itself was incomplete and presented selectively, and, most absurdly, that I had been siphoning business funds for personal tracking software and off-the-record asset consolidation. I handed the letter to Ellen in silence. She flipped through it and didn't even blink. We've seen worse. I haven't, I muttered. It's desperation, Tom. He's stalling, hoping to drag this into arbitration so long that you settle just to get your life back. Well, he's not getting a dime. Ellen nodded. Then it's time we play offense. We prepared a rebuttal packet, footage timestamps, system access logs, text messages from staff confirming Adam's late-night entries, and copies of internal documents that had gone missing and then mysteriously turned up on competitor bid sheets days later. That was the part that hit hardest. Not just the affair, not just the betrayal of trust, but the proof that Adam had leaked our project numbers to another firm in the South Hills. A firm that had no business bidding on our territory. A firm we once beat out for a municipal contract. And now they were submitting estimates with numbers eerily close to ours, down to the decimal. Laura's fingerprints weren't just on the door handle. They were all over the paper trail. In one of the internal emails we recovered from the cloud, Laura had forwarded a full budget breakdown. One Adam was supposed to keep private, along with a subject line that read, "Just in case you want to compare numbers, winky face." That smiley face nearly made me throw my chair through the wall. Instead, I brought it to the board, and they brought the hammer down. Formal charges were filed against Adam for breach of fiduciary duty and corporate misconduct. Laura wasn't an employee, but her name was added to the complaint as a known accomplice. She'd used my office keys, entered restricted spaces, and handled documents that never should have left the building. We also filed a police report, not to press criminal charges yet, but to begin the process of documenting theft and unauthorized access. I'll never forget the look on Adam's face when we handed him the notice during a deposition prep meeting. He didn't even get angry, just smirked like he couldn't believe I'd actually gone through with it. "You're really doing this?" he said, laughing under his breath. "After everything we built?" "No," I replied. "I'm doing this because of everything we built. You tried to burn it down. Grow up, Tom. People have affairs. It's not the end of the world. This isn't about the affair anymore. It's about sabotage, and you're going to answer for it." His lawyer tried to cut in, but I stood and walked out. I had no intention of wasting another breath explaining morality to a man who had none. But the backlash was real. That weekend, one of our subcontractors, someone Adam had worked with closely, pulled out of a pending bid, citing instability in leadership. I got word that a few of Adam's loyalist contacts were quietly shopping around for other firms. Some were hoping he'd launch his own company. Let them. The damage he caused wasn't going to be swept under the rug just because he told a few stories about office politics gone wrong. I worked double shifts to repair our vendor relationships. I held back-to-back meetings with clients to reassure them the business was secure. Mia drafted official talking points for public communication, leadership transition, internal audit, renewed commitment to transparency. Everyone knew it was PR spin, but they also saw I wasn't hiding. I showed up. I answered questions. I faced the damage head-on. Laura, on the other hand, disappeared. For 3 days, I didn't hear from her. Then, one morning, a manila envelope appeared on my doorstep. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Tom, I never wanted this to spiral like it did. I swear. Started small. Just conversations. Then opportunities. Adam convinced me I was